I want to start with something that I suspect a lot of people listening will really quite recognize. You get invited somewhere, a party maybe, or a work event, or some community thing that sounds on paper like exactly the kind of thing that you're going to enjoy. And you think, great, I'll go. And then the day arrives and something tightens in your chest. You spend a little bit too long messing around, deciding what to wear, and you get there a little late. And once you're there, you hover near the edge of the room and you leave a bit earlier than you'd planned. Then on the way home, you feel a mix of relief and something else, something a bit deflating. Well, if that sounds familiar to you, then welcome. You are in very good company. And welcome to, or welcome back to, the new 5 a day. I'm Nick Walters. This is Your People, episode 2. And today we're going to talk about shyness. We're going to talk about what it is, why it's so common, what it costs us, and most importantly, what we can actually do about it. Because we can do something about it, and that's the headline. Okay, so let's get into it. So first things first, what is shyness actually? Because I think there's a lot of confusion here, and the confusion matters. The word that often gets used interchangeably with shyness is introversion, and they're not the same thing, not even close, really. Introversion. Well, introversion is about energy. An introvert is someone who finds sustained social interaction draining on their energy. Someone who needs quiet time to recover, who generally prefers smaller gatherings to large ones. There's nothing wrong with that. That's completely normal. There's lots of introverts who have rich, full social lives. They then just need a bit more time on their own to balance it out for their own energy levels. Shyness is different. Shyness is about fear. Specifically, it's the fear of being judged, embarrassed, or rejected in social situations. A shy person often genuinely wants connection. They want to join in. They want to make friends, to speak up in the meeting, but something holds them back. And that something is anxiety. Now, this distinction matters because if you're an introvert who's perfectly happy with your social life and enjoys your own company, you don't have any problem to solve. But if you want more connection, if you want to feel easier and more confident in social situations, but something is stopping you, well, that's shyness. And that is something we can work with. Researchers who study this stuff are pretty clear on one more thing. Shyness and social anxiety overlap a lot. In fact, a lot of what people describe as just being shy is actually a mild form of social anxiety, a fear of negative evaluation that sits on a spectrum from the occasional nerves we all feel sometimes to something far more persistent and impactful. The good news is that everything we know about social anxiety points in the same direction. It responds to change. It is not fixed. It can be worked with gradually and without any kind of drama. So let me explain what's actually happening in your body when shyness kicks in, because I think it helps to understand it better. Not in a clinical way, but just, here is what your body's doing and here is why. When your brain perceives a social situation as a potential threat, and let's be honest, for shy people, lots of social situations can feel like potential threats. It triggers the same basic alarm system it uses for actual danger. Remember, we discussed that sympathetic system earlier. Your heart rate goes up, your palms sweat, your throat tightens, your thoughts either race or they go completely blank. Your body is essentially preparing to run away from a social gathering. This is not a character flaw. This is not evidence that you're broken or weak or hopeless in social situations. It is your threat detection system, a very old, a very hardwired part of you. It's misfiring. It's treating a conversation at work drinks like a tiger in the undergrowth. And here's the really important bit. This alarm system is kept alive by further avoidance. Every time we skip the event or stay quiet in the meeting or leave the party earlier, we send our nervous system a message. That message is good call. That was dangerous. You were right to escape. And the fear stays in place, and oftentimes it grows. The path out of this is not through willpower. It's not about deciding not to be shy or telling yourself to just get over it. Path out of this is through very small, very manageable steps in the direction of the thing that you've been avoiding. And we're going to talk about exactly what those steps look like. The most consistent thing that research on overcoming social anxiety tells us is this: graduated exposure works. What that means in plain English is start with something so small it barely feels like anything at all, and then build up from there. Because every time you have a social interaction that goes okay, every time you say hello to a stranger and they say hello back, every time you ask a question in a meeting and the world doesn't end, you accumulate a tiny piece of evidence. Evidence that social contact is safe. Evidence that people are genuinely really quite nice. Evidence that you can handle it. And your brain is paying attention to this evidence. Slowly, gradually, the alarm volume starts to come down. So, what does tiny actually look like? It looks like this. You make eye contact with someone in a shop and you smile. That's it. That's the whole interaction. That counts. Or maybe you say good morning to a colleague that you would normally walk past in silence. One sentence. Good morning. Done. You ask the barista what drink they would recommend. You comment on the weather to the person in the queue next to you. You stay at the party for 5 minutes longer than you'd planned. None of these feel like grand achievements, but that's exactly the point. The goal isn't to prove anything to anyone else. The goal is just to accumulate evidence, one tiny interaction at a time, that this is manageable, that you can do this. Think of it like any other kind of fitness. You don't begin by running a marathon. You begin by jogging around the block, and then a bit further, and then a bit further again. Now, here's another thing that's worth talking about, because it's a big part of what keeps shyness in place, and that's your thoughts, your internal monologue. Shyness doesn't just show up in the body. It shows up in what we tell ourselves. And the stories shy people tell themselves tend to follow a pattern. Everyone's watching me. I'm going to say something stupid. They're going to think I'm boring. They're going to remember this for years. I always mess these things up. Yeah? These thoughts feel like facts. They don't feel like stories. They feel like actual, accurate reports on what is going to happen. But they're almost always distortions. These are anxious predictions masquerading as realities. Here's a useful question to ask yourself when you notice one of these thoughts arriving. Is this actually true? Or is this what my anxiety is telling me? Because most of the time, the honest answer is people are not watching you as closely as you think. They're thinking about themselves. They're not cataloguing your every awkward moment to replay later. In fact, they've forgotten it already. Most social missteps are completely forgettable to everyone except the person who made them. Another useful question to ask yourself: what would I say to a friend who is thinking this about themselves? Because we are almost always kinder to our friends than we are to ourselves. Now, I want to be clear. This isn't about talking yourself into false confidence. It's not about convincing yourself that everything's going to go perfectly. It's about introducing a bit of realistic balance, a bit of perspective. Most conversations don't end in disaster. Most people are doing their genuine best. Most awkward moments dissolve into nothing within minutes, if not seconds. Now, progress here is not linear. There will be conversations that feel really bad. There'll be events that don't go as hoped. Moments when the anxiety spikes again out of nowhere, and that's completely normal. That's fine. That's what trying looks like. Doesn't mean you failed at anything. It means that you are in the game. So keep going. Now, one thing that makes a huge difference and that doesn't often get talked about enough is the setting. Now, some social environments are genuinely significantly harder for shy people than others. A loud party full of strangers where the only purpose is to talk to people. That's pretty high stakes, to be honest with you. However, a structured group activity where you're all doing something together and the conversation has a natural starting point, something to build around, that sounds much more manageable. This is why things like book clubs, walking groups, cookery classes, volunteer projects, choirs, running clubs, all of these tend to work really well for people who struggle socially. It's because the activity gives you a focal point. It gives you something to talk about, something to do with your hands. The pressure of filling the silence is dramatically reduced when you're busy filling cardboard boxes. Connection happens almost as a byproduct. So if you're thinking about where to start, I'd suggest looking for something structured around a shared interest rather than pure socializing, and setting yourself a single, simple, modest goal before you go. Not have loads of great conversations and make 3 new besties. That's setting yourself up to feel like you've failed. How about you target talking to one person I haven't spoken to before? Have one conversation. That's enough. That's a success. One more thing to learn about settings is to lean into your natural strengths. Shy people are often genuinely excellent listeners, attentive, warm, and curious. That's not a consolation prize. It's a real gift that people can feel. You don't need to be the funniest person in the room or the one holding court. Asking real questions, actually listening to the answers, making people feel heard. That's the foundation of almost every meaningful connection ever formed. I do just want to say a word about when the practical stuff in this episode might not be enough on its own, because sometimes it isn't. For a lot of people, shyness is a manageable challenge. It responds to the kind of gradual, gentle approach we've been talking about with the tiny evidences. Small steps, realistic thinking, the right settings. That works for a lot of people over time. But for some people, what presents as shyness is actually closer to social anxiety that's genuinely getting in the way. It's affecting work, it's affecting relationships, it's affecting opportunities, and causing real distress, not just occasional nerves. Now, if that sounds familiar to you, if your social anxiety is something you've been carrying for a long time or something that's limiting your life in ways that matter to you, it is worth having a conversation with your GP. There are effective, evidence-based treatments for this, talking therapies that have a really strong track record. And there's absolutely no reason to try to manage it alone. Seeking support isn't proof that you've failed to sort yourself out. It's evidence that you know what you need. Now, that's an awesome form of self-awareness, which is a really good thing to be proud of. So I want to leave you with something that I find genuinely useful to hold on to when it comes to this stuff. The goal is not to become someone who loves small talk and never feels nervous in a crowd. The goal is just to feel a little bit freer, to be able to choose connection when it matters to you, rather than having shyness make that choice on your behalf. And the connections on the other side of that discomfort, the friendships, the sense of belonging, the feeling of being known and being seen by someone. These are among the most valuable things in human life. We talked about this in episode 5. The evidence for what good relationships do for our health and longevity is genuinely remarkable. This is not a soft, optional extra. This matters and you can do it. You don't have to be fearless to find your people. You just have to be willing to take one small step and then another and then another. Now, if you want to go deeper on the science, the mechanisms behind social anxiety, the research on what interventions work and how, there's a companion deep dive post on the website. That's www.new5aday.com. That's 5 as a number. That's also got a full citation list. Everything that underpins what we talked about today, all of the science is there. Now, next episode, we're going to move back to pillar 1, sleep well, where we're going to look at how we can create a great bedtime routine that's going to help you sleep through the night. That's a great one. Be sure not to miss it. So if this episode has been helpful for you, please like, follow, and share it with someone who also might need to listen. That's the most helpful thing that you can do for the show at this point. Until then, take care and go and say hello to someone.